Welcome to Center Pointe. If you're new here, we're so glad that you've chosen to worship with us today. We'd love to connect with you, so you can pull out your phone and text the word CP Connect to the number 33222, and that will shoot back a very short form for you to fill out, which will allow us to get some information back to you about our church. Or you can also visit the Welcome Center before you leave today, and there's a gift for you over there if you're new. Also, next week we have our First Step class, which we do about 6 times a year. So if you are newish, and you're just looking for a church home, trying to figure out who Center Pointe is, what are you guys all about? First Step was designed for you to kind of give you an overview of who we are, what our vision is, where God is leading us, and how you can get connected here. So it's a 2-week class. So it starts next Sunday. It's during this service time. So go to the 9 o'clock service, go to 10:30 First Step, and then again on November 4th, it's the second week of that class. So it's a 2-week class. You can sign up for that at the Welcome Center, or you can sign up online. It'll give you a chance to meet some of our staff there as well. Now, our vision here, as we've stated multiple times this year, is that we want to be a church where broken people can experience the unconditional love of Jesus. And there's lots of people in our community that need to experience that kind of love. And so we want to make sure that we always have space here. We never want to be full. And full looks different to some people, but we always want to make sure that there is room here in this church. So as you guys know, on January 6th, we're launching 3 new service times. So we're calling it CP3, Center Pointe 3 services, but there are also 3 specific things that we want to ask you to do. So the first thing is we want you to choose an hour to worship. An hour to worship, just like you're doing right now. And some of you are going to be tempted to just slide to the left to 10 o'clock. Avoid that. Avoid that urge, all right? Unless you're serving at 8:30 or unless you're serving at 11:30, worship at 10 o'clock. That is awesome, but we want to make sure that there's room in that middle service for our guests, because we know that that's going to be the most popular time to come. It just is. We've done these service times before, way back when, so we're launching into that again. So we kind of know from experience what to expect. We know from other churches what to expect, and so we really want you to pick an hour to worship other than 10 o'clock, unless you're serving. So that's number 2. Pick an hour to serve. All right, so if you're serving at 10, you can attend 8:30 or you can attend 11:30. If you're serving at 8:30, attend at 10 o'clock. But pick an hour to serve. If you're not involved in a ministry, this is an opportunity to step in and help us lean into this vision that God has given us over the next 5 years of kind of doubling our kingdom impact. So we've kind of set our sights on growing from 1,200 to 2,400. So 3 services is not the only step, it's the first step. And you can help us achieve that vision by serving 1 hour, worshiping 1 hour. And so if you just can't serve in a ministry, totally understand that. But maybe the way that you can serve the church then, if you're only going to be here for 1 hour, is to attend 8:30 or attend 11:30. It's a small thing that makes a big impact, so that we can make sure that we have room in the 10 o'clock service for guests from our community to come and experience the unconditional love of Jesus, just like you have. And the other thing we want you to do is pray. Pray leading up to that launch. So CP3, 3 things. Worship an hour, serve an hour, and pray. I'm going to ask you to pray daily. And I want to specifically ask you to pray at 3:43. So 3:43. So set your alarm every day for 3:43. If you want it to be the AM, more power to you. I'd recommend the afternoon. All right, so when your alarm goes off, your watch goes off, all right, you're in a meeting, keep eye contact. That's okay. Jesus can hear you, all right? You don't have to call a timeout, and just pray right there. Paul says, pray without ceasing. You can just pray right there. God, I pray that you would unleash this vision at Centerpointe, that you would empower our church, that you empower me to be a part of what you're doing in Liberty Township and beyond through Centerpointe. So you'll get more information about that, but we're just going to ask you, make that ask of you today. You can learn more at our table out in the lobby. There's a CP3 sign around it of how you can get engaged, how you can be involved. Our biggest need right now is volunteers at the 11:30 service. So for our next gen, for connections, for creative arts, which is all the things that we do in here on a Sunday morning, from video to lighting to worship team, those kinds of things, and operations. So you can go out there and have a conversation with them. You can also look online for those opportunities as well. So we really pray and hope that you'll be engaged in helping us on this first step of our 5-year vision, which is now closing in on year 1 in just a few months. So we are in part 4 of a series we're calling The Gospel. And so we've been exploring the gospel and what the gospel means, that it's good news for all of life. It's not just good news for later when we get to heaven, but it's good news for right now. And we've looked at the gospel story, the story arc of the Bible, of creation and fall and redemption and restoration. And then we've kind of unpacked our own story. How does our stories, our personal stories, fit in that story arc of the Bible? And today we're going to turn our attention to other people's stories, because other people have gospel stories that we're called to step into and help navigate and unpack what's going on in their lives. We're called to be gospel listeners. Now, have you ever had a time when somebody was saying something to you, they were telling you something, they were giving you some pretty important information, and you were totally focused on something else and you completely missed what they said? Has anybody had that experience? Yeah, I never have, but my wife did a couple weeks ago, and so I just want to share that with you, okay? So I was sharing with her about several meetings that I have coming up. I'm moving into a super busy time in my ministry here in the life of the church, and things we're unpacking and talking through. And I had one particular meeting that night. It was kind of a last-minute meeting that I had to schedule, and so I was telling her about these meetings, and I got a meeting tonight, and she says to me, "What time is the meeting?" And I said, "It's at 8:30, okay, conversation over." And so Carter was out of school that day, so we took Carter to lunch, had lunch with him, and then I was leaving lunch, coming back to church, and she said, "What time will you be home?" And I said, "I won't be," which means I have a meeting that I told you about, and I'll be home after that. I won't be home for dinner. That's what "I won't be" means. I don't know if you knew that, but she didn't ask me to clarify that. She and Carter, I guess, looked at each other and went, "That's kind of a weird statement." But anyway, that's what I said. So I came back to church, worked until my meeting. I left here, went to my meeting. I got home at about 10 o'clock, and I walked into 3 very unhappy people. And it turns out that Janelle remembered all of my meetings except the one I was just at. She didn't remember me telling her that I was going to be at this meeting. She didn't remember asking me what time that meeting was. And so for 2 hours, they've been trying to find me, which in today's age should be pretty simple, right? We all have phones, except my phone never rang. I never got dinged with text messages. And we have Life 360 on our phone. I don't know if you guys have that app. If you have a teenager, a driving teenager, it is a beautiful thing. You always know where they are, and you always know how fast they drove. So would have been terrible when I was a teenager, but I'm glad that as a parent I have it. And so we always know where everybody is. I can just look on the phone. Oh, there's where Janelle's at. And it showed me, see, look on the app, it showed me in a field off of Kyle Station Road. It's just all like a perfect storm, right? So she drove to church looking for me. She drove to the field, shining her lights in the field, remembering that I said, when she asked me what time to be home, "I won't be." So seriously, this super innocent statement became very ominous in the time. And I'm a communicator. That's what I do. That's what I'm doing right now, communicating. And but man, I'm still a rookie at communicating things to Janelle. I just forget to tell her things all the time. And that day, I was so intentional about telling her what was coming up. And we still had this miscommunication and a technology fell. Now, she's convinced that I never told her any of this, okay? That's her story. And to her credit, my memory is not great. But I remember. I told her. And we won't know for sure until we see Jesus and he sorts it all out. But for this illustration this morning, we had to go with my side of the story, okay? So when she preaches, she can share her side of the story. I'll talk to her about this. She's a good sport. You know, the most important part of any conversation is not so much what is said, but what is heard. What we hear or what we don't hear sometimes can make all the difference. Like when you show up to a college class and your professor hands you the test that he talked about the last class that you don't remember him talking about, and you're the only one in the classroom that's completely surprised by this test like I was, what does that tell you? Obviously, he didn't communicate it, right? So I can sympathize with you now. He never said anything about the test. I got an F, right? I didn't even deserve an F. It should have been like a G or an H. It was so bad. It's the only test I got an F on, and it was the class called Christian Evidences, which is how to defend the gospel. So there you go. I ended up with a C, and glad the elders never asked for my college transcripts, so they really don't matter. Just go with that. Jesus has given us a clear mission. Love God, love people, go and make disciples. That's the mission laid out for us. Go and share the good news with people who need to hear the good news. He stated it plainly. He stated it simply. He stated it clearly. It was written down for us to read and reread and reread and reread. And here's how some people have interpreted. Here's what they have heard Jesus say. Go stand on a street corner with a bullhorn and tell people they're going to hell unless they confess Jesus as Lord. That is a true statement. Without Christ, hell is an eternal reality. It is a terrible delivery. Terrible delivery. The Great Commission is not judgmental. It's relational. The literal Greek reads, as you are going about your daily life, as you are going to the grocery, as you're going to work, as you're going to school, as you're going to the movie, as you're doing life, make disciples. Teach them about Jesus. Teach them about my commandment to love God, love people. Our marching orders are not to stand on a street corner telling people what we're against. It's to walk across the street, rub shoulders with people, and tell them what we're for. John chapter 20, Jesus is getting ready to go back to heaven. He says this to his disciples, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. The Father sent Jesus into the world, not on the corner to yell down, shout at people. He sent him into the world to be with people. The Father sent Jesus into the world with skin on. It means he was incarnated. He was wrapped up in flesh so that he could look like us, walk among us, be with us. He said, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. How do we know that God is loving and compassionate? Because we've seen Jesus. We've read about Jesus in the Gospels. We see the love of Jesus coming out. We see how Jesus is compassionate with people. And since we've seen Jesus, we have seen God the Father. The Father sent Jesus to be relational because this whole thing has always been about relationship. The Father sent Jesus full of grace and truth. And that's why one of our core values here is grace and truth. And we state it this way, that we believe the best way to love people is by sharing biblical truth while showing unconditional grace. We hold on to the tension of both because that was the way of Jesus. He never let those two things go. And one of the best ways that we can demonstrate grace to other people is by learning to listen to what they have to say. Monty Roberts is known as the horse whisperer. Horses communicate with each other through what he calls Equus. His father trained horses by beating them into submission. He grew up watching this and believed there has to be a better way to train horses. So he spent his time roaming the prairies and observing how wild horses communicate. Horses belong to herds. Horses do not want to be in isolation. They're pack animals. They want to be with other horses. And so if a horse was isolated, and he was abandoned by a herd and wanted to join a herd, it would have to be accepted by the lead mare. Every pack has a lead mare, and that's where the communication starts. And so this isolated horse would approach the lead mare, and the lead mare would begin by flattening out her ears and looking this horse dead in the eye. That was the challenge, to see if this horse really wanted in. And sometimes a horse may just run away. But if the horse wanted in, they would keep this communication going. And that isolated horse would respond by licking and chewing and then bowing his head in submission. And at this, the lead mare would then turn her flank toward him to a 45 degree, which her flank was exposing the vital side of her. Somebody just took a picture of me doing that. I saw that. See where that shows up later. Anyway, vital side. Oh, okay. But I'm on the screen doing this. Vital side, vulnerable part here. This indicates an openness. All right. This is an invitation to come closer. And if the isolated horse was still interested in becoming part of the herd, he would walk closer until eventually they would touch. And Monty called this join up. And at join up, the horse would then be accepted into the herd. Now, he saw this play out multiple times. And he theorized that the best way to train a horse was to imitate the lead mare. And so today, the average time it takes him to train a horse, a wild horse, all right, to rider, is 16 minutes. So I want to show you this video. All right, it's not HD. I don't even think it's SD. But it's grainy, but you can tell what's going on and just kind of listen to him commentate on this.
There you go. Oh my goodness, that's a pretty wild-looking place. So, I say you want to go away? That's fine. Go on away. But don't go away a little, go away a lot. Now, here's a filly that isn't terribly aggressive about going away, but she's disoriented in here. And it's a strange place to her. She's not comfortable with barging forward into an area that she's not familiar with. And that's sometimes a bit of a problem, and it certainly doesn't hurt to acclimatize your horse to a round pen for 3 or 4 days or even more if they are wild and unfamiliar. Now we know that we want her to go both ways because the flight animal is that sort that investigates every opportunity to flee in directions whatever available. And in a round pen, you essentially have a direction left and a direction right available to you. I use this light line so that if it should go out there and hit her, it can't cause her any pain, because pain would be exactly what we don't want to have happen. Leastwise, she simply couldn't come in and join up with me. Now we've done both directions, and we'll take the pressure off, and we'll start thinking Equus. We'll watch for this conversation, and it's coming fast. This ear closest to me is locked on. She's already brought her head off that wall twice now, wanting to come in closer. My eyes on eyes, shoulders square, pushing away. There's licking and chewing. Very nice. Very nice. So, we've predicted the ear. We've predicted the head and the eye coming over, coming closer. We've nailed our prediction on the licking and chewing. And there's the bowing down. There's the bowing down. Very nice. Super good girl. That's so demonstrative right there. That's just as you see the Mustang do it. There's the licking and chewing again. Quite good. Very good conversation. Next round, I will go passive. Good licking and chewing. I will go passive the next round. Take my left shoulder by, and then drop my eyes away from her eyes and reverse the whole procedure. There we go. I'll get myself on a 45 now and invite her in. Very nice. Super good girl. There is the moment of join up. You are a good girl. So I'll tell her how nice she is for coming in here. Invite her into my chest, standing right in front. Don't look her in the eye. I've already done that, and that means go away. Now I want her to be here with me, and she's finding value. And that's join up, and now I'll walk away and attempt to get follow-up. Wonderful. Wonderful. Good follow-up. I'll come around here now and try to make a left turn and have her come with me. Super good girl. And that's the first saddle pad of her life. That I can assure you of. And this is the first saddle of her life. And there it is. It's amazing when you get their confidence that the joined up horse looks up at his first rider, not as an adversary, but as a partner.
I've had my dog for like 16 weeks. All right, I can't get any follow-up. You know, I just get a staring at me strangely. I've seen this video countless times, and it always amazes me, not only because of what he's able to accomplish in such a short period, minutes, but because of the similarities between horses and humans. There's so much in here that we can learn from how to talk to people and invite people in. I use this light line because if it hits her, I don't want it to cause any pain, because pain is exactly what we don't want. I think all of us have a little flight in us. We've been hurt. We want to be accepted. We want to be part of the herd. We want to be part of the community, but we're just not sure that we can be vulnerable. We've tried that before, and we felt some pain in it. And so we think maybe it's just too risky to share my story, so I just got to pretend that I have it all together. And that's the kind of the life that we live. And I think we're all looking for somebody to just kind of turn to a 45 and be a little vulnerable with us and invite us into a conversation, invite us into a relationship. The people that we are drawn to the most are people who show an interest in us rather than just talking about themselves all the time. They ask questions, they listen well. See, when we shout at somebody through a megaphone, or we beat somebody over the head with a Bible, we're not inviting conversation, we're imposing our convictions. And it hardly ever works. That approach says, hear me. I have something to say. I have something very important to share. I have a point to make. I'm right, you're wrong. Hear me. And in this cultural context, it's as bad as it's ever been. Like Facebook and Twitter, that's the megaphone. Hear me. Hear me. Sharing the gospel is about letting people know that Jesus is good news in the context of their bad news. And so in order to understand their bad news, we have to hear them. See, hear me almost never works. Let me hear you almost always does. Here's why. This one is about me. It's about my point. It's about my argument. It's about my take. It's about my conviction. This one is about the other person. See, this is loving right here. And Paul describes what love is for us, right? He says love is patient. This says, hey, you go first. Love is kind. This says, you finish. Go ahead, I don't want to interrupt. He says love does not dishonor. This is not dishonoring. The most honoring thing you can do is let somebody share their story. Is just hear somebody. He says love is not self-seeking like this. Love is others seeking. And then he goes on to say, love never fails. Love never fails, which means love always works. So that's the approach that we should try. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says, the purpose in a man's heart is like deep water. There's a lot in there. But a man of understanding will draw it out. This is the posture that we are to take as Christ followers. We are to be men and women of understanding, to draw out what is deep within people's hearts and souls. See, as gospel bearers, we're also gospel hearers. We're not called to be understood. That's not our calling. We're called to be understanding. Our job is to listen well and to draw out what is buried deep within people. It's an invitation for them to walk into a safe environment where they can share their journey, they can share their story, they can share their struggles. And Jesus did this better than anybody. And the quintessential example of this is in John chapter 4. And we unpacked John chapter 4 back in January when we were talking about grace and truth. And so as I was thinking about this message, I was trying to find another story, but just kept coming back to John 4. And I hesitated because we've already talked about it. But, and I know that you remember everything from that message, right? Because you guys are great listeners, so you've already got the whole thing memorized. But God just kept leading me back to this text. And this is probably my favorite gospel story, because it just shows and demonstrates the heart of Jesus. But as I was digging into this text, I found something new. And it stirred in me all week. Now, Jesus is traveling from Judea to Galilee, and the shortest route is through Samaria. And he stops in the town of Sychar, and this is where John picks up the story. He says, Jacob's well was there. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's the kind of the foundation of Israel. So Jacob is a huge figure in their ancestry and their history. His well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. Now, this was a 70-mile trip, all right, 90-minute Uber drive. Didn't have Uber, all right? So he's walking it, 2.5-day walk. So tired from his journey is an understatement. He was worn out. And when you walk a long distance and you sit down, what is the first thing you want? A drink of water, right? What would Jesus do? He would want a drink of water. And that's what he does right here. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep, 100 foot deep." This is what just kind of stopped me in my tracks this week, and I've read this I don't know how many times. And this is big. And if you know the story, she gets caught up in why Jesus is asking her this question, because he's a man, she's a woman. You're not supposed to have talk. Men and women don't talk in public. And he's a Jew, she's a Samaritan. Jews and Samaritans did not get along. They were not to have any exposure or relationship with each other. So she gets all caught up in this. So there's a gender issue in this story. There's a racial issue in this story. And she's been out of shape over why Jesus is even asking her this question. But it is so much bigger than that. And here's why you and I have to stop arguing with people. Here's why you and I have to stop trying to win. Here's why we have to stop trying to be right. Here's why we have to take the posture of humility, because the God who created water asks her, a human being for a drink of it. I mean, if anybody had the right to play the I'm better than you card, okay, or I don't need anything in the world because I created it, that would be Jesus. He had the ability to play that card, but he doesn't do that. Will you give me a drink? See, the God who created the universe, who spoke it into existence and everything in it, he has the ability to create a 100-foot straw, okay, to get his own drink. He could have just sucked it up. He could have just said, thirst be gone, and behold, it's gone. He didn't play any of those cards. He just becomes vulnerable in that moment. He exposes his weakness. He is thirsty. He is dehydrated. He doesn't have a cup. And so he asks her for help. She has something to offer him. She has something that he, being fully human, desperately needs: a drink of water. Now, who in this story has something more valuable to offer? It's not a trick question. Who in the story has something more valuable to offer? Jesus. It's always Jesus, guys. Okay, the answer is always Jesus. Right, you hear the story about the little boys in Sunday school, and the teacher's like, hey, what's gray and has a long tail and eats acorns? He's like, I think it's a squirrel, but it must be Jesus. Right, because it's always Jesus. It's always Jesus. It's never a trick question. She's coming to draw water at the hottest part of the day. In that culture, nobody came to draw water at the hottest part of the day. But she's coming to draw water at the hottest part of the day because she wants to avoid people. She has some relational dysfunction. She's been divorced 5 times. She's now living with a guy. That was unacceptable in that culture. And so everybody's talking about her. She's the talk of Sychar. So she's coming out to avoid people. And lo and behold, there's Jesus. All right, she needs more than water from a well. She needs a hero. She has a fall, she has a conflict, and she needs a hero to redeem her story. And she's been looking for it in all the wrong places. She needs somebody to do what a man can't do. She needs Jesus. And Jesus knows all of this. You know why? Because he's God. And Jesus doesn't, this is so important, Jesus doesn't start this conversation by calling out her bad behavior. Jesus doesn't start this conversation by talking about her dysfunctional lifestyle, by calling out her sin, by telling her she's got to clean herself up. That is not how he starts the conversation. It is not with a statement of facts. It is with a personal struggle. Will you give me a drink? I need your help. I need your help. I enjoy, I don't know about if this is true of you, I enjoy being around people who need something because I can relate. I can't relate to people who have it all together. I can't relate to people who don't need anything because that's not my story, and I'm guessing it's not yours either. See, the truth is we all need something, even if it is only a drink of water. Jesus uses a weakness and a human need to draw her in. He uses vulnerability. He turns to a 45 degree and exposes himself. And he asks her for water. And she pours out her heart. And all of this is a lesson in humility. Jesus is teaching us the concept of relational evangelism, like sharing the good news in the context of relationship. Relationships aren't built by shouting at people across the street. They're built on vulnerability. When we're vulnerable with people, it lowers their defenses. All right, it decreases the desire to flee because we've all got that in us. We just want to flee. And it invites them to draw closer to us. And it creates a safe environment where they can come in and they can share their own search for water. Because we're all thirsty. And as this conversation continues, Jesus just keeps making provocative statements that foster the dialogue. He talks about living water. He says, if you knew who I was, then you would ask me for living water. And here's what she says. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank it from himself? And if I was Jesus, I would have said, yes, I'm Jesus. This is why God didn't ask me to save the world, okay? I got the gift of sarcasm, not the gift of salvation. But anyway, so Jesus just keeps it on the quiet. He doesn't divulge who he is. And he keeps drawing her in with intrigue. She understands the concept of living water. Living water was moving water. It was fresh spring water. Spring water is always moving, and it was referred to sometimes in that culture as living water, as opposed to water that's not moving or stagnant. See, in our context, it'd be like somebody offering us a bottle of Dasani versus a drink from the tap, right? We would take the drink from the bottle as opposed to the drink from the tap. Both are good, but one is better. That was their context. So she would much rather have this fresh water. She's done this well thing. She does it every day. But she's intrigued by this fresh spring water that Jesus is referring to. But now we know in hindsight that Jesus is not talking about water at all. He's talking about the Holy Spirit who would come into her life, redeem her story, restore her as part of God's prized possession, and live within her and create a spring of water in her that would never run dry. And so he continues this conversation. Everyone who drinks this water, the water from this well, will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. And she still thinks he's talking about physical water. That's good water. And she says, give me this water. I don't want to keep coming to this well. Like, if you got this living water that can quench my thirst, I'm all in. Jesus is promising her something better, but it's even better than she could ever imagine. This water isn't just for our body, it is for our soul. It is deeper than our physical thirst. It reaches down deep within us and addresses what's broken in us. And so now Jesus steps into truth. He says this, verse 16, go call your husband and come back. Awkward. Now, Jesus has built a relationship by exposing his own weakness, right? Now he's inviting her to expose hers. He's inviting her to state her truth. This is self-discovery. Rather than just jumping in and telling her everything he knows, he just wants her to say it for herself. And she does. She states her truth. I have no husband. And Jesus says, I know. You've had 5. And the man you're living with now is not your husband. I needed to hear you say it. I need to know that you know. There's a thirst in your soul. But you keep coming to the wrong well and it just leaves you thirsty. It's not working. I've got something better for you. Physical relationships can't resolve the conflict in our souls. And a lot of us have tried it. That's a well that we've gone to. And when you try to make when you try to make your spouse the hero of your story, you're asking them to play a role they were never meant to play, which means they will disappoint you. Divorce is almost always the result of experiences falling short of expectations. But this was her fall. This was her conflict. This was her relational dysfunction. And maybe you can relate. Maybe divorce is part of your story and relationships are still super hard for you. Or maybe your fall, your conflict is not relational at all. Maybe it's professional. Like in our culture, work is a big deal for most of us. We find our identity in work. Maybe you're a workaholic. All right, we live in a culture where alcoholics are shamed, but workaholics are glorified. Like that's a badge of honor. Oh, you work 60 hours a week? Well, you must be awesome. See, it's easy to spot a fall when it's an addiction, but if that's not your story, like last week when we were writing out our stories and like you don't have this, come to Jesus moment where you were in the depths of hell and you were this major rebel and God pulled you out of that, or you were addicted to drugs, or, you were in prison for 10 years. And that's not most of our stories. And so we look at that and go, well, I don't really have a story. I don't really have a fall. Well, sure you do. Like this woman in the story, you've had 5 or 6 or 7. Paul says in Romans 23, for we have all sinned and fall short. The Greek is continuous. We have all fallen short of the standard. And so maybe you're a workaholic. Well, you know what a workaholic is? That's an addict. They're addicted to work. It's just an addiction that is socially acceptable and perhaps even encouraged. But whether it's an alcoholic or a workaholic or some other holic, it's all an attempt at being the hero. One is going to the well of alcohol to quench the thirst. One is going to the well of work and accomplishment. But you're still trying to be the hero. Maybe you're a perfectionist. And if you're a perfectionist, you are an addict. You are addicted to perfection. You are addicted to approval. Perfectionism is about being the hero of your story. So you're always busy making sure everything is just right. You don't rest well. You're a people pleaser. Because if people aren't pleased with you, then you weren't perfect. You get frustrated easily when your expectations don't equate to your experience. When your experiences fall short of your expectations, it's a nightmare. You're longing for perfection. That is the result of this fallen world. It is a result of your fall. It is a conflict in your story that you're trying to make right. Here's how I know, because I stare at one every day in the mirror. I drink from that well all of the time. I can get 99 out of 100, and the one wrecks me because it wasn't perfect. But here's the thing, I have a few somebodies in my life who have turned to a 45 and invited me in. They've shared their stories with me, which gives me permission to share my story with them. And they don't beat me over the head. They don't judge me. They just listen to my bad news and they remind me of the good news of the gospel that, Shawn, you don't have to be perfect because Jesus was. You don't have to please anybody because Jesus is already pleased for you. You work for an audience of one. And my thirst is quenched by drawing from the well of the gospel, not from somebody else's well. And here's the cool thing. You and I get to do that for other people because we've been redeemed from our addictions. We've been redeemed from our relational dysfunctions. We've been redeemed from our conflict. And yeah, we still live with the consequences of it and we still fight it from time to time, but we're not defined by it. That is the gospel. We are defined by Jesus and who he says we are. And so we're gospel receivers, which makes us gospel hearers, which then allows us to be gospel bearers. We hear bad news from people, and then we get to bear good news. God gave us 2 ears so that we could listen well, and with one, we keep it tuned to the person we're talking to, and with the other ear, we're tuning it to heaven to hear what the Father has to say. So as I listen to your bad news, I'm listening to the Father speak good news into your situation. And one of the things I hear all the time is, Shawn, I never know what to say in those situations. Like I didn't have an addiction problem, so I don't know what to say to an addict. I've never lost somebody like that, and so I don't know what to say to this person. Listen, here's what I would say to that. When you listen with one ear to the person and one ear to heaven, the Holy Spirit will speak into you. Jesus told his disciples, I will send the Holy Spirit, and he will remind you of all the things that I said, of all the things that I taught you. And so when you give yourself over to Holy Spirit gospel listening, the Spirit will speak into you with the right words, and sometimes the right words are no words. Sometimes the posture just needs to be to sit and listen and be present. I had lunch with a friend this week who just lost his son recently. I have no idea of that kind of pain. And I have no idea what to say. Because nothing I can say will take that pain away. Anything I say sounds superficial and surface. The only thing I could do is just be present and listen. So let me take the pressure off of you, because some of you feel like you've got to save the world. Our job isn't to save people. Our job is to serve people. And the best way that you can serve people is by listening well. Jesus is the hero, not us. Jesus does the saving, not us. And so one of the best things you can do is just listen. When you listen, you're simply saying to the other person, you're worth it, you're valuable, and you're worth my time. There will be opportunities to speak truth, but not before we've listened with grace. And when the time for truth is right, never tell somebody what Jesus can do for them until you've shared with them what Jesus did for you. Right? That's what they want to hear. What did Jesus do for you? You got a story. Share it. I love how this story ends. It says, leaving her water jar, because she found living water, so who needs that? The woman went back to the town and said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. They came out of the town and made their way toward him, and because of his words, many more became believers. Not everybody, but many of them did. And they said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. See, the reason that people don't believe what we believe is because they don't know who we know. They don't know who we know. And too many times we want to introduce them to our beliefs instead of introducing them to Jesus. Beliefs don't change people. Jesus changes people. She didn't run back into the town and say, hey, y'all, clean up your act. I'm saved. I met Jesus. I'm just shouting to you the gospel. You need to get your act together. What did she say? Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Now, I know you guys have known it all the time. You've been talking about it all over the place. But Jesus has told me. And now I believe it. I believe that my fall was real. I believe that I was in relational conflict. And I want you to come and I want you to meet this man who has told me everything I've ever did. Beliefs don't change people. Jesus changes people. Beliefs aren't good news. Jesus is good news. Beliefs don't resolve conflict. Jesus resolves conflict. Beliefs aren't the hero. Jesus is the hero. Don't lead with your beliefs. Lead with your Jesus. Listening before speaking. Grace before truth. Now, in order to listen well to other people, we've got to learn to listen well to our Father who still speaks. So here's the question. What is he saying to you right now? What's he saying to you? It's not going to be an audible voice. God still speaks. He doesn't speak audibly. He speaks through scripture. He speaks through people. He speaks through circumstances. He speaks through music. He is speaking all the time. The question is, are you slowing down enough to listen? And so I'm going to test you right now because we're past time. And some of you are like, you're wanting to get out of here. Settle down. Settle down. The band's going to play a song right now, and I just want you to listen to this song about the Father's voice that speaks truth over us. And as you're listening to these words, I want you to listen for the voice of the Father. What is he saying to you in this moment? And then the best question is, what are you going to do about it? What step will you take as a result of what you've heard? Just maybe even bow your heads, close your eyes, and just listen for the next few minutes.